Queues are a feature that we've rolled out. We rolled out in the summer release, and our sales guys have been making a lot of headway with them. Queues allow you to take really any object in your Salesforce and display it so you have a list of those objects in one part of your page. So you can see that list over here. And then a detail object. When you click on one of the list items, a detail implementation, a detail object, detail version of that object appears in the rest of your page. So I wanted to spend some time thinking about a couple of the properties of the queue that confused me when I first started working with them, but that actually present a lot of power. So let's go to a page here that I've set up and kind of show you how the queue is constructed. So on this page, I really just have one model, which is my lead data, and pull in as much. Really, for the queue, you don't want a lot of data here because you're really just going to pull in what you need for your list. And then you bring in a panel set. In the left-hand side of the panel, you put your queue component. In the right-hand side of the panel, you put a page include component. So here is, in our components list, here's the queue component. Drag that down if you want. And here is our page include component. You drag that down. Drag and drop, easy as can be. And then you configure. So the configuration is what always tripped me up. That's the details that are up here in the properties. The queue has 3 different panels of configuration, and the page include just has this one. The first thing you need to do is relate your queue component with your page include component. And so in each case, there will be a component ID property. So I've named this component ID lead. So you can see that's the component ID. And then if I go over to the page include component, you'll see there's also a unique ID property. So that's the lead. Again, same. That's got a match. That would allow you, if you wanted to have a couple of different page includes on your page, and you could have one queue that went to one page include and another queue that went to another page include, or you might be doing different things on your page that requires other page includes. So that the queue knows which page include to go to, you have to include that property. But then the properties that was pretty straightforward for me. I kind of understood that. The properties that confused me, let's back up, one more thing. The page include is going to render another Skuid page. So it's gonna when you click on the entry in the queue list, it is going to render this Skuid page according to the properties that you set up. So you need to have designed that page. I'm not going to show you designing that lead detail page, but you need to have designed that page and have it ready for you to designate. What was confusing to me is that it felt like a lot of these properties were repeated on the page include properties and on the queue item action properties. And so what I want to walk you through is why they're in each place. So if you think about it as follows, that what the properties in the page include stand for is the way the page will appear when it first loads. And the properties in the queue item action properties are the properties that page include will take when you click on an item in the queue, and Skuid sends data to the page include. So because you have properties on both sides, you can do some really sophisticated things. So in this first implementation, I have told on the page include, I've not actually given it any properties for what should load by default. And then I have said that when the queue item is selected, it should load this lead detail queue. So let's go preview that and see what happens. Okay, Skuid doesn't like that. It says you've been inked. It doesn't have a page to go get when the page first loads. But when you select an item from your queue, it's going to come back and repopulate that section with that queue detail page. So maybe there's a use case for that, but probably not. So probably what we want to do is we want to say, let's choose a page here. So if we go to my next example, in this example, I actually said, okay, let's load the lead tab page, and then when the queue item is selected, we'll replace that with the lead detail queue page. So that's what I showed you at the very beginning. So when the page loads, it loads with just the leads tab, so you can see all the leads. Or you could load a page here that just says select a lead item or something like that. And then when you select your first lead, it populates there. So that's how the Skuid page works. It actually lets you do something that's pretty amazing. You could have 2 queues on your page. I think I did this in 7. In this instance, I've actually got 2 different queues on the page, and each of those queues sends is calling the same component ID. So they're calling this lead page include component ID, but they're calling a different Skuid page. So the queue, this first queue, which is about leads, is calling the lead detail queue page, and the second queue, which is about cases, is calling the case detail queue. So let's preview that guy. And so we've got our two queues here, and I have a dummy page here that's loading first. Choose a queue, and then we choose the lead queue, and we get lead data, or we choose the cases item, and we get the case item. Pretty cool parlor trick, eh? So by having 2 queues, each sending different pages into that detail page include, you can get some pretty sophisticated features. One note on something that's needed there: in order to get your 2 queues stacked on top of each other, you need to use a panel set in our vertical panels type, and then your queue data needs to be limited so that it only includes a very short amount of data. I was just pulling back 5 records at a time, so that your page does not, this column does not get extended significantly. Anyway, that's maybe more of a parlor trick than something anyone would really want to do, but hey, I thought it was cool. The next set of properties that I started trying to figure out and work on are the query ID properties. So again, on both properties panels, you have entries for query string, and I thought, why is this in both places? What would the use be of having it in both places? Which do you use where? Well, you'll notice that in this instance, query string is blank in both places. What Skuid does, so backing up again, the same model that we had for pages is true here. So what's included in the page include property is what happens by default. So if there is a query string that is included in this in the page include, when the page first loads, that query string will get executed. But then when the queue item gets selected, what is indicated in this item actions property, that is what gets overwritten. So Skuid, by default, or if this is blank, in the queue item actions property, Skuid will replace this with basically ID equals parameter ID. So it will look for the ID field of your model and pass it into the page include. And so that, since 99 times out of 100, that's going to work. That's why this page, when I select a particular entry, it's going to send that ID over into the lead detail page, and it'll work. But there's other things you can do with the query strings. So let me close out of a few windows here and go back here and pull up 4. In this case, I have given a query string in the page include property, and the guys maybe can tell me that there's a simpler syntax here, but essentially what I'm asking the page to do is go to a particular, I'm asking it to go to the lead data model and get the first row of data and get the ID field for the first row of data and provide that as my default query string. So another detail about page includes, when you do a page include, that page is going to get pulled into the parent page, and so all of the parent page's models would then be available to the detail page. You have to be careful and make sure the models in your detail page have different names than the models in your parent page, or you'll get some ugly conflicts. But as long as you've taken care of that, anything in the detail page can reference models and data that are in your parent page. So here I'm asking to get the lead detail model, which drives my queue, and show the ID of the first record. So that gives me, I'm not doing I have not selected anything in the queue, and by default it shows me the detail for the first record. And then if you select the fourth record, it replaces that with the fourth record. So I think that's a pretty effective use case. That seems to, I think most people would want your queue to pre-populate with the first piece of detail. So that's the way to do that. Using our model merge syntax, ID equals scalar model dot model name dot data lowercase d dot 0 dot ID. There's a final property in the queue item actions that I didn't understand. It's this default item parameter. What this property does is it actually suggests that the user is on one page and clicks a link to get to the queue. And then that parameter flows into the queue and sets what the default item should be that shows up by default, shows up in the detail of the queue. So let me just kind of walk you through that. Here, just for grins, I have a lead detail page, and on that lead detail page, I've got a C in queue button, and on that button's redirect code, I've got, you know, I have that the page I'm going to is my queue testing version 6, and then I've got a parameter ID that I'm setting. So I'm taking the ID parameter of this lead and including it in my redirect URL. So let's go look at this page. Quick preview, of course, because this is a detail page. I know we're kind of confused with this lead detail business, but we've got to choose a specific entry in order to preview it. Here's that dumb little page that had that C in Q button. So we'll click the C in Q button, load the queue, and then bam, there's our the lead ID. You can see up here in the URL, the lead ID got passed in as a parameter, and the specific ID got thrown in as the default. This one happens to be the very first one in the list. It's probably not a good example. It specifically replicates what we showed before in our other trick, but I think you get the idea. So those are the properties of the lead of the queue, the specific properties in the item action section, and the properties of the page include section. To recap, the items that you put in the page include properties correspond with the default view. What happens when the page loads up and no queue item has been selected? And then what's shown in the queue properties is what happens when an entry in the queue is actually selected. So what page is selected, what query string item should be passed over, and if a particular queue item is coming from a prior page in your workflow, what should that parameter be? Any other questions, guys?
What does the lazy load property do?
Did you go over lazy load?
I didn't go over lazy load.
Yeah, that's more relevant. That's more relevant for when it's in like a tab, when a page include is in a tab. But it would also be a good way here for it to not. Basically, that avoids the whole like that when you view bidding, that would basically say that it's not going to load anything. Yeah. It's not going to load anything in that page include by default. It's just basically don't do anything to start out with is what it amounts to for the whole queue.
You pick an item in the queue.
Yeah. So
So
if you did that.
So we lazy load.
Yep.
All right.
You won't get the